back, and welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson. Always delighted and honored when I have a couple of moments to sit down with Dr. Tim Murrphy. He's a licensed psychologist and a clinical director of the Fortis Future, which is a center focusing on the care of veterans, military, and first responders with PTSD. Dr. Murrphy also was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives from Pennsylvania's 18th Congressional District 8 times, so he has that dirty T-shirt. He's the author of, I think, a book that you have to have in your office or library if you deal with people. It's called The Christ Cure, 10 Biblical Ways to Heal from Trauma, Tragedy, and PTSD. Now, he's done his homework here, and this is a great resource. Check it out. He does have a website, drtimmurphy.com. Dr. Murphy, good to see you, friend. How are you?
I'm doing well. Great to be with you again, Perry.
Thank you for your time. This is an interesting question and topic today. We're watching people really lose it over the proposed cuts in government restructuring. And I understand that when your livelihood maybe is threatened, that creates a lot of emotions. But I'm also concerned that this would trigger another level of a description of mental health. What's your take?
Yeah, well, let's look at a couple of things you mentioned there. With government restructuring, there's a certain type of leadership called disruptive leadership. And that is when you say, let's look at where we want to be, but that we don't have to continue to do things the same way to get there. In our nation, our ideals of freedom and liberty are important. But what we've drifted into, slowly slouching, I guess, towards it is really one way of saying there are no standards anymore. There really isn't a constitution. It is whatever you want it to be. The famous Shakespearean quote is, nothing is either bad nor good, but thinking makes it so. And so what has happened is there's been an intentional change in defining morality on your own terms, and then pushing away people who believe that there's a God or there's religion or there's a higher standard that we should be adhering to, even a constitution. Remember, we're a constitutional republic, and in that, we don't just get to vote on things in majority rules, but our constitution was meant to protect the minority. But here's what's happened over time. We have ended up with massive government programs to take over everything, to make decisions for us. Maybe it started off as a good idea. Here were some people who were impoverished. We want to help feed them. Lyndon Johnson started the war on poverty. But since then, we've spent tens of trillions of dollars, and we have more poverty than before. Then what happens is, along comes President Trump, Elon Musk, and their team, and says, we're going to change things here. And one of the things they're going to change is saying, we're just spending too much money. We can't sustain a debt where we're spending $1 trillion a year just to pay off the interest on the debt before anything else. So that means some things are going to get cut. Now, I guess some aspects of this have been like a bull in the china shop, saying we're just going to start off with a 10% cut and work from there. And one would hope that some of this would also be a matter of saying, well, where do we really need to cut? What is the waste, fraud, and abuse? Let's look at that first. So this has been disruptive to people who have been in a comfort zone for all of us. I know among my veteran friends, when we hear that the VA has had some cuts, and right away rumors come out. And newspapers are happy to publish rumors. They'll even say it is rumored that the VA is going to cut 10% or 20% or 50%, and other programs are going to cut. But they'll say it's a rumor. And they'll say, well, it's a rumor, but I'm going to tell you anyways and scare you. And that is unfair and unfortunate. But then we find out more to say, well, we're not going to cut benefits for veterans. As a matter of fact, the VA, when back in the year 2010, there was 23 million veterans in the United States. And then today, it's by 2018, 2023, it became more like 18 million. So do we really need as many people? And there was a big surge of hiring a few years ago with what's called the PACT Act. That was to take care of people who were injured in smoke pits. But we get so used to having big government, we forget to say, do we really need this? It's sort of like the family that has a big house and their kids are gone off to college, they all got married, and the family says, do we really need a 5-bedroom house anymore? Or a 3-bedroom house? Maybe we can move into something smaller in a condo. And it really is saying, what is affordable to us? What do we really have to have? But that scares people who are used to having things a certain way. Now, the key thing in your question is, does it really become mental illness? Well, we can talk ourselves into that and say, this is a crisis by which I cannot get my way out of. So you have the one hand, where there's some cuts that we really need to take a more careful look at and say, you don't need to cut all these jobs in the Department of Justice because we need to prosecute criminals. On the other hand, it is healthy to say, what do we really need? And ask that question. And that is a mature thing to do. That is a thing that we all ought to be doing in our lives anyways. And then look from that point on.
Because one of the things that seems to be coming out of this is we're seeing the significant difference of being employed by government versus being employed by, by the by a company, by private enterprise. There's a huge difference in not only accountability but in benefits. And when all of a sudden, when that's being threatened, I can understand the emotional setback. But part of this today, and I'm wondering if President Trump, Elon Musk, others are looking at this. A CEO has a job to do two things: keep his eye on the vision and an eye on the bottom line. But the span between the vision and the bottom line are the people. And I'm wondering, are we going too fast here? It has to be done in order to keep the company alive, so to speak. But are we going too fast?
Well, I must say, I think in some ways we are going too fast. I think it'd be better to sell this in terms of let's go systematically through this and see what is really needed, do an accounting. Because in a company that's saying, look, we're spending too much money, we're not making money anymore, we have to find out, what do we really need to do? Do we need to sell off parts of the company? Do we need to make something more efficient? Those are the questions to ask. What has happened, however, is a concern is that some of the places that money has been going is being hidden. And so as they look at this using artificial intelligence to scan through, particularly through things through USAID, they start to find accounts that are hidden. Okay, I understand that. Go after those things quickly. But another thing is it is much better to be systematic. Now, I understand Congress has said, here's the budget coming up, and we're going to aim for this amount of money to be cut. And then it is up to the secretaries and the departments to say, what do we really need and what do we really not need? For example, the big one is, what do we need in terms of a Department of Education? What's helpful, what's not helpful? Should we return money to states, return money to people? But the idea of just going at this and saying we're just going to make all these massive cuts, we do have to understand, as you said, these are people, these are families. They've got bills to pay, and then suddenly come and see they get a text message and say, don't come to work tomorrow, you're not working here anymore. I think we would all say that that's probably too harsh, and it ought to be calmer and more systematic and help people transition to other jobs.
Is losing your job a PTSD moment?
It sure is. A financial devastation for someone. I mean, one person who may say, well, I have another job lined up, I saw this coming, okay, there's a transition involved. But generally, one of the stresses, major stresses in life is losing a job. Even changing to a new job is a major stress. But when you find out you've been fired and say, I don't have money, I don't have savings, I can't go the next month's bills, I have car payments, I have rent and everything, it can be hugely devastating, whether you're an individual or a family. Then what we see is a great deal of stress. And if a person says, I'm even losing my health care, I don't have anybody to go to even talk to about this. Yeah, it can be very overwhelming. We need to be sensitive to that. And then I see that, for example, rumors are that Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, otherwise known as SAMHSA, is also receiving large cuts. Well, that's an organization that should be giving grants to work on things like substance abuse and serious mental illness and homelessness and the rest. That's an organization I've investigated thoroughly in my time in Congress, looking at where there has been waste and misspent money. And I think that we should go after and say there needs to be accountability. Stop giving out grants for silly purposes. It's not up to the federal government to fund yoga classes and relaxation and diet and nutrition, but it is a place where the federal government could say, we'll have money to help go to your community to deal with these problems, but use accountability and make sure you're returning ultimately a lot of that responsibility to states, counties, and communities to help take care of things. Because if we always push things upward and expect Uncle Sam to take care of it, we're not doing our part. But it comes down to this point, by going too fast, as much as I respect and admire, we need to cut these many, many things, there are people here, and we need to be sensitive and compassionate to them.
Why has taking personal responsibility become an issue?
Well, to grow government, you have to have government say, we can do it better than you. Ultimately, this gets in the areas of communism, socialism, totalitarianism, where the government or a dictator says, we're going to do this for you. They convince people they're not competent to do them themselves. If you look at historically, in order to do that, what a government such as communist governments want to do then is they have to make it so they have to take God out of the picture. You have to have religion out of the picture because you can't have anything above big government. And you'll notice over the last 3 years, we've been pushing away religion, all religions, particularly Christianity and Judaism, and saying we don't want them discussed in the classroom, in the public places. We don't want prayers before town meetings or anything. And yet what faith does is it puts a lot of responsibility on the person. I mean, we know Jesus' messages are, don't worry, do what you want. I'll take care of it at the end. Grace will save you. Go on, have fun. No, it's no, you got to do this. You got to work at it and work at it all the time, not only for yourself, but helping other people. But when government wants to grow, they like to say, you're not competent to do this. Well, we're going to do it for you. As a matter of fact, it's okay to complain you're not competent and expect everybody else to step out of the way to take care of you and not expect you to take care of yourself. That's when we've gotten pretty harmful. And I think that's been a big backlash of the rest of the community who say, why do I have to listen to what you're saying that you don't want to work or your coffee was not warm enough so you're going to be late for work? Take responsibility. Life is tough. Get in there.
So what I'm hearing you say, and I think we have to be honest here, that a lot of these programs end up being enablers.
Yes. They end up being enablers.
And I think we have to be honest with that. And if it's enabling people to be dependent upon, then the whole subject of personal responsibility becomes almost fearful.
Sure, because we've trained a couple generations to have someone else do it. We have kids who, with bulldozer parents who didn't want their children to suffer any stress at school. They'd complain to teachers when the child got a D. They didn't study. They deserved it. And the teacher has to bump it up to a higher level. The enabling is when we say we're going to do it for you because you're not competent. I mean, think about this. Do you see any commercials sponsored on any media source, sponsored by the federal, state, local governments, saying, do this to take care of yourself? It is call this number, take care of go to this program. And okay, it's good to have those resources available. But can you imagine if we told people, big health problem is obesity. Instead of just going and take this drug and you're going to lose weight, watch your diet. Get out and exercise. Massive numbers of people are obese, increasing health problems, increasing healthcare costs. But I don't see any commercials like there used to be back. I'm old enough to remember being a kid in the John Kennedy era, where there was a big push for the President's Council on Physical Fitness. You were supposed to be working at it all the day. You were supposed to be healthy. That was the big push. Walk places, exercise, be able to do these things at school. You don't see that now. Now it's constantly saying that we're not allowed to shame someone. I'm not saying we should shame one, but we're not allowed to call someone's attention to that, accept everything. Well, there's a need to take personal responsibility. Say if you're out of shape, get in shape. If you're not healthy, do what you can to get healthy. Yes, we'll help those who are poor, who are homeless, who are in prison, and take care of those as Jesus told us to. But when you can take care of yourself, it's not right to expect other people to take care of you. That's the unfair part.
Pretty interesting. All right, let me take a break here. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, Dr. Murphy has a website, drtimmurphy.com, and you certainly want to Google and get his book called The Christ Cure, 10 Biblical Ways to Heal from Trauma, Tragedy, and PTSD. When we get back, I want to bring the faith factor back into the conversation, Dr. Murphy, because this is an element that has to be considered, and a lot of people overlook it. So we'll be right back. Welcome back. An honor to have back with us today Dr. Tim Murphy is a licensed psychologist. He's wrote a book that's just really a great resource. It's called The Christ Cure, 10 Biblical Ways to Heal from Trauma, Tragedy, and PTSD. There's a picture of the cover of the book. Great resource. You should have it in your office. You deal with people. This is a must resource. And then he does have a website, drtimmurphy.com. Dr. Murphy was trying to figure out how to ask this question. Faith in mental health. a huge factor. In a lot of ways, it's left out, and I know your heart is to keep it in. I just got through reading a book dealing with the depression that the late Charles Spurgeon dealt with in his life. It was very significant. And the commentary of the book was very interesting. And I come to the conclusion that when you're dealing with depression at any level, but especially the deep, deep level, it's hard to even insert faith in there. Those of us who don't deal with that, or at least not, and I'm not talking depression about having a bad day, I'm talking stuff that's really clinically deep in somebody's soul and heart. How do we go about giving them the hope of the gospel?
A brilliant question, and because it is something we need to address in all of our lives. So we've all have times of sadness. Sadness is normal. We have times of stress. Stress is normal. What do they say? Stress is mandatory, misery is optional. But when it comes to another level of deep depression, the body is actually shutting down in many ways. The brain is actually reaching a level where the whole body, with a great deal of stress hormones and with excuse me, with inflammation in the brain, there's chemical changes that actually change the architecture of the brain, and it's tough to get out of it. You know, you use the saying, we could use the saying, stuck in a rut. Now imagine that way, that you're stuck in a rut that's so deep you cannot see over it, you cannot see a way out. And that is part of the darkness that is in there with depression. And with medication, sometimes that can be helpful. With other supports, other clinical techniques, that can be helpful. But a person may slide back into it. The way the gospel can help in this is always have people around, maybe they're professional coaches, maybe they're mental health coaches, Christian mental health coaches, but ones who are really there to continue to support the person. Because when we're super depressed, the thoughts we have in our head, not like hearing a voice, but the thoughts we have in our head continue to say, there is no hope. You can't get out of this. And what happens is people may not want to be around you anymore. On two levels. One, they think you're a real downer to talk to, and I don't want to be down. And the other person also feels, I don't want to bring people down. People probably don't want to be around me. I'm making them miserable. And it can get so deep and so dark. And the worst case is a person thinks, I think I'm better off dead. Not actively looking at suicide, but just thinking, like Noah, Nineveh, take me. Take me now, like Job saying, I don't want to live anymore. Can you just get me out of here? And it is that deep. It is that dark. So the gospel is a constant message of helping people to understand, number one, just because you're thinking it doesn't mean it's true. And I'm going to say something that's going to sound a little bit insensitive, but it's true. I remember years ago, a professor telling me that sometimes one of my jobs as a psychologist is to convince people not to believe every stupid thing we think. And so if we are saying things to ourselves like, no one loves me, there's no hope in this world, there is no good in the world, just because we think it doesn't mean it's true. And that's where the gospel message of hope, of love, of faith, of trust in God, that even when things are very dark and we don't see a reason for it, we don't always have to figure it out to know that there still can be a reason. And that is the belief that when a person is surrounded by people within the faith community, that's a really critically important part. But you need the psychological methods, the medical methods, the faith messages, all combining together. We know there's been voluminous studies that say that those who are most likely to get out of addiction or prevent drug problems are those who regularly practice religion. I'm not talking about occasional believers, that they say, yeah, there's something out there, something spiritual. I mean something who really practice religion. That is the key factor. I mean, something like 80 or 90% of studies support that idea. But when a person is dealing with addiction and they've tried to get off, and they've tried to get off, and they've been through treatment programs, one after another, very often it's not uncommon to see someone go through 8 or 9 or 10 drug treatment programs before something finally sticks. It is the continuity of the faith message which continues to help people bring back hope in their life and overcome that depression. And then as a person maintains that healthiness with fitness and right diet and sleep and mental attitudes, those are all part of it. You can't just think your way out of it. It's all those things together. And here's a way that churches can really help.
Well, what I'm learning from this, a couple things. It's deeper than I thought. Number one. Number two, I'm a lay counselor. I'm not a professional. I just get a lot of people in my office with problems. And thank you for your book. But here's something I learned, and that is, it's somebody who's suffering with depression, deep, and they have been with people that spiritually condemned them. It's kind of like a double whammy.
Awful.
And and where you lead from there is very delicate.
Yeah, even biblically, it used to be believed that when someone had problems, you look at the sins of their fathers as being part of that. The New Covenant tells us no, that we really are looking at things with ourselves. In fact, Jesus says, don't worry about yesterday, pay attention today. That's what we should be doing. A wrong type of spiritual counseling is to tell someone, well, you're not praying enough, or you're not reading the Bible enough, or maybe you're doing it wrong, or what else is taking place. That is not going to help. That kind of shaming of someone is not going to help. What I tell people, it's okay if you've done something wrong. It's okay and appropriate to feel guilt. That means your soul works. When that occurs, you say, okay, what did I do wrong? What do I need to confess, reconcile, repent? All those things are part of it, because those are actions one can take to heal, to get to forgiveness. Shame blocks forgiveness. So when we tell people you're not good enough to be healed, well, that doesn't sound like Jesus' words to me. But here's part of the problem, Harry. You mentioned you're a lay counselor, but among clergy, about 85 to 90% say they really don't have much training in counseling, and they look for more. That's why one of the reasons I wrote my book, The Christ Cure, was to help clergy who want to know what methods do I use to help someone, and to help the lay person to know what kind of biblical methods are there to help someone too, since this is where some of the best payoff is. So it's learning these methods, but putting them all together. And I might say in this, I don't know how many mental health clinics there are in America, maybe one per county in some cases, maybe in some cases none. How many psychiatric hospitals are in America? Maybe, 30-some thousand. But there's 370,000 churches in America. Can you imagine what would happen if we change is to train more clergy, more lay counselors, maybe more mental health coaches within churches? What could be done to unleash the power of faith and mental health and healing? I know we now have a faith office back in the White House in the West Wing, and she is dedicated towards this issue, too, of making sure we do say, how do we get more training back into the churches? And not every pastor can be spending their time on this, but certainly they can have a mental health ministry with people there who know what can I look for and when do I need to refer someone on, plus looking at all the preventative methods of fitness and mental attitudes and sleep and right diet. Those are all in there. And you know what? The Bible does talk about diet. Go look up what Daniel ate. The Bible does talk about the importance of sleep and rest. The Bible does talk about, read Paul. He doesn't sit around slouching. He says, you got to get out there and work it all the time. Those are all important parts of mental health. In fact, we know fitness and diet can be more effective than medication for mild and moderate depression, and certainly important parts of diet. But those are more important than ever shaming someone when they feel depressed, because depression, it's hard to get out of it as it is.
Well, again, I'm not the professional here at any level, but one thing I have learned from this is that after reading this book and going through this experience, I'm probably guilty of not having enough patience. But what I've learned from this book, probably the best thing you can do is just listen. And say nothing. There is nothing you can say that's going to change the situation, but you're giving them an opportunity to vent. That has to be therapeutic.
It is therapeutic if the person knows you're being compassionate. I mean, sometimes people say, well, how can you listen to people's problems all day? And maybe the psychiatrist says, well, who listens? That's not the right technique. The idea is to listen with compassion. And you don't have to have an answer. Sometimes you can say, I hear you. That must be very, very hard. I've never experienced that. I don't know what it's like, but I still feel for you, and I'm here for you, that you're not alone. Mm-hmm. And God tells you, you are not alone. You're never alone. And I'll be with you at your side through this. That is so important for someone, because some of the worst types of trauma are betrayal and abandonment.
Ooh.
You don't want to abandon someone in their moment of need. Maybe they're going through the divorce or death of a spouse or death of a child or a bad diagnosis, loss of a job. Being with them during those times can be a great, great help to lead them on that path.
All right, check out the book. It's called The Christ Cure, 10 Biblical Ways to Heal from Trauma, Tragedy, and PTSD. This is an amazing resource. If you're a pastor, get this book. If you're just a person dealing with a lot of people, deal with this book. There's so many resources and aids. You'll probably end up writing in the margins. drtimmurphy.com is the website, drtimmurphy.com. Thank you, Dr. Murphy. You're a blessing, friend. Thanks for your work, and let's stay connected.
Thank you very much. God bless, Perry.
You too.